Get ready to rumble. Shilling Show Unleashed on the Seven Thunders Media Network. Former city councilor, husband, father, and community watchdog. Your host, Rob Shilling.
Welcome to the Shilling Show Unleashed podcast. Remember, your direct support makes our show possible, and you can directly support this podcast by visiting shillingshow.com and then clicking on the Patreon banner at the top of the page to make a monthly contribution. We appreciate your support. Local government is asking the question, how do we solve our problems? It's a broad question, but the answer always seems to be we solve our problems with more taxation. We recently discussed a proposal to tax grocery bags in Albemarle County. This was initiated by Diantha McKeel, Albemarle County Supervisor, and seemingly supported by all of her Democrat colleagues. Not to be outdone, Charlottesville, the city of Charlottesville, run exclusively by Democrats like Albemarle County for many, many years. Charlottesville wants to raise real estate taxes. Well, they've got an education problem they want to solve. They have big, worthless schools that are turning out people that don't know a lot. The success of the schools has been marginal at best. Even though they try to hide that and cover it up with the outcomes, anybody who looks at the numbers and who interviews people who are graduating from Charlottesville City Schools knows that many people are getting a degree that's virtually worthless. So let's go ahead and reconfigure the schools so we move the grades around and solve the problems that way. The minimum cost of this project is stated $50 million. That was an agreement between the bodies discussing this, the elected school board and the elected city council, again, all Democrats. They decided they would spend a minimum of $50 million. Since when does a project come in and you say, here's the minimum amount of money we're going to spend no matter what? That's what happens when you have mindless people making policy. And what are they essentially doing? Well, it's very similar to rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. The Charlottesville City Schools are a massively failing institution. They should really just be disbanded. Instead, they're going to dump a minimum of $50 million into this just to move the grades around. I think when all is said and done, they're so giddy at the prospect, they're going to end up spending $100 million or maybe even more. This is a government that presently is swimming in money. All of the federal funds coming down from the generosity of Uncle Sap going into Charlottesville's coffers. They have no idea how to spend it. So if they really put their minds to it, if they really chose to prioritize, they could come up with a way to stop spending some of the money on fruitless projects and redirect it to the schools if that's what they really wanted to do without raising taxes. And yet the starting point for all of this is we're going to raise taxes. It's only a question of just how much will the people tolerate. Yes, that word was actually used in a public discussion. So what government wants to raise taxes in the midst of a pandemic? Well, one that is hopelessly out of touch. How much? 2 cents a year over the next 5 years. That'll be a total of 10 cents on the real estate tax, taking it from 95 cents up to $1.05. How is this going to impact the voting public in Charlottesville? Well, first of all, it will have a tremendous impact on housing affordability. When you look at your housing bill for the month, taxes are a big chunk in Charlottesville, and this is going to increase it dramatically. What about people renting? Charlottesville typically has about 60% of the households who are renters. Maybe they think they don't pay any taxes, but like a corporation which simply passes its costs along to the people who are customers, Charlottesville landlords will, out of necessity, pass increased costs on to the renters. That's just the law of economics. And of course, there's all those local businesses. Now that the government is sucking up the money, they won't see it. What about the restaurants? What about the convenience stores? All of these local businesses, there's a big chunk of money the government will be sucking up that they will never, ever see. And of course, maybe the most frightening of all is a bigger and more powerful tyrannical government, as if they needed any more power and any more money in City Hall. The sad thing about all of this is there are no voices of opposition. not a single person has said this is not a good idea. We need to hold the taxes steady, even though they're increasing every year by nature of inflation of real estate prices in the city of Charlottesville. So people are getting tax increases regardless. This is just going to multiply it. Ultimately, the heroes here, and I use the word loosely, may be the ones that support only 8 cents or 7 cents rather than 10 cents. But I think it's a fait accompli that whoever is elected to the next Charlottesville City Council will gleefully push the yes button when asked to vote on increasing the real estate tax rate. In a country founded on pushback against unjust taxation and taxation without representation, now we're living in a world where the more taxation, the merrier. It's a frightening mantra. But it's where we're at today in Charlottesville and in Albemarle County, thanks to the Democrats that run everything. The Shilling Show Unleashed podcast continues in a moment.
Community-supported investigative journalism. Shilling Show Unleashed.
BorderHawk.news is a one-stop shop with the latest news about immigration nationalism and globalism. The BorderHawk staff daily curates immigration news stories and, in the fashion of the Drudge Report, updates the site with cutting-edge content and original first-class commentary. BorderHawk.news highlights national and international media reports, tweets, and nuggets buried in local news blurbs, polls, video clips, and policy research. BorderHawk is pro-legal immigration, pro-rule of law, but against an unsecure border as countless Americans have suffered violence at the hands of criminal illegal aliens. And an increasing number of Americans are concerned about how mass migration affects their daily life. BorderHawk.news will remain on the forefront of the immigration issue with a buffet of info to read, evaluate, and share. Bookmark BorderHawk.news. Add them on social media at BorderHawkNews on Twitter.
Charlottesville's community watchdog, Rob Shirley.
The Shilling Show Unleashed podcast continues, and we welcome to the program Craig Shirley, a pre-eminent Reagan historian, a prolific author, and today's topic, the 10 plagues of American liberalism. And Craig, welcome to the Shilling Show Unleashed.
Thanks, Rob. Thank you very much.
You know, I love that you start talking about plagues because it brings up biblical references, and America has been blessed by God throughout our existence. Why is that, and how is that manifested?
It's manifested in many ways. Is that the American Revolution, against all odds, is that we invoke God. From George Washington on down to the founders and the framers invoke God, and Abraham Lincoln certainly invoked God in the Civil War, and believed that they're on the side of the right. For over 200 years, we've always been on the side of the right. And when we made mistakes, we apologize for them, which is the Christian thing to do. So, and it's a conservative thing. Liberals aren't particularly honest or Christian, or they tend to be atheists, and they tend to, blame America for everything. Whereas we celebrate America. This is a great country. This is the greatest country in the history of the world, but liberals are hell-bent on destroying it.
So let's talk about the advent of liberalism in America as it began to influence our policy.
Yeah, well, you have to go back to the beginning. There were draft dodgers in various wars who were liberals, and the people undermining America. Ironically, is that they never supported extended freedom for the individual, which has been a conservative tenet since the time of Thomas Jefferson and the Declaration of Independence. Was that expanding human freedom has always been a central thesis of American conservatism. Lincoln was a conservative. He was extending freedom. Teddy Roosevelt was a conservative. He was extending freedom. When the 19th Amendment passed, Democrats voted against it, and that was extending women's suffrage. Civil rights movement was passed by American conservatives. It was Democrats who were opposed to it. It was liberals who were opposed to it. So down to the age of 200 years is that we've always been on the side of expanding the human experience, and liberals have been on the side of shrinking it and enslaving people, much as they are today. trying to enslave us now under Joe Biden, by shrinking our rights, by making us wear masks when we don't have to wear masks. Anything they can do to control people, they will attempt to do. Taxing us, regulating us. Every day, it's a fight to prevent them from shrinking our freedoms. And ironically, some of the former communist countries, which Reagan freed, are more free today than is the United States. You don't hear the expression anymore. It's a free country. They used to be a moniker that was often heard. I remember as a boy, some of you say, "Well, it's a free country." You don't hear that anymore.
It is remarkable, and I remember hearing the phrase as well, and I haven't heard it in so long that I'd almost forgotten about it. It certainly is. We're talking with Craig Shirley on the 10 Plagues of American Liberalism. I'd like to go to the border crisis. As somebody who was raised in Southern California and saw this probably before most of the rest of the nation, I'm astounded at how we've thrown aside the law and just kind of ignoring what's going on there.
Yeah, it is astonishing. Thousands of people willy-nilly walking across the border every day in pursuit of free stuff, free phones, free cars, free housing, free medical, whatever liberals vote to give them, for free, they're going to keep coming for. The idea of trying to make these countries, prosperous democracies has eluded everybody, and liberals would certainly be against it. I mean, they're in favor of corruption, as they are throughout Central America. That's why they're leaving, because their countries are so corrupt and so badly mismanaged, and they don't get the free stuff that they would get from the United States government or from the state government. So that's why they're coming here today. There's no other reason. I mean, they're coming here for freedom and for free stuff.
It's interesting as I look back on my own family history, and most of my people came in through Ellis Island, but they came here because they loved America. I remember talking to my grandmother. She wanted to kiss the ground whenever we talked about America. So that's not the case anymore, not for everybody, but for most people.
No, it's not the case at all. When your grandparents came here, I don't know where they came from, Ireland or Italy. Or wherever.
From
Italy, okay. Is that they joined what used to be known as the melting pot. Was that we merged together, and we were stronger as a nation because because the partisanship ended at our nation's waterline. We could fight among ourselves, but we were unified against other countries. And you were free to pursue your own dreams and rise as far as you could in American society without the heavy hand of nobility or some other corruption. That's not that way anymore. Unfortunately, is that more often than not, the media and their handmaiden, liberals do everything they can to undermine America, do everything they can. Look, most republics fail in the 3rd century. If you look back through history, the Roman Republic, Greece, other British before Cromwell, they all collapsed in the 3rd century. And America is now in its 3rd century, and I don't believe America is special enough anymore to survive. So I think, I know it's apocalyptic, but I foresee that this country will collapse in sometime in this century. We're certainly headed that way. And what will eventually happen is that the country will separate. We'll have two different countries. We'll have trade relations and travel relations, but there'll be pagan America, where the liberals live, and decent America where the conservatives live. And so Texas and Florida and Tennessee and South Carolina will be part of decent America, and part of the loser America will be New York and California and others. And it's almost inevitable. That's the way we're headed. There's nothing culturally in common anymore from a person from Michigan with a person from Florida.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I was opining on this the other day to my audience and saying, if they did that and they built a wall around those states and then they were abutting the pagan states, which side do you think people would be climbing over to get into and climbing over to get out of? It's a rhetorical question, but I think it's obvious. Yeah,
absolutely. They always. That's marked through time, through history, is that they destroy. I mean, we see it right now. Like, for instance, Massachusetts. Massachusetts has been a cesspool for as long as I can remember. Crime, illiteracy, bad education, liberal policies, drug use, crime. It's really high taxes, high regulation. It's really a rotten state, and it's been losing population for years. But what they've done over the years is that I remember years ago working for a senator from New Hampshire, and I lived there for a short time, and I always respected New Hampshire because it was a rock rib, American libertarian conservative state. People mind their own business. It was clean. It was well run. They had low taxes. They had the best schools in the country. It had much to commend to it. And of course, liberals, having trashed Massachusetts, cast an eye toward New Hampshire and said, "Oh, well, we can move into there because they have low taxes and low crime, but we'll take our political attitudes with us." So what do? Is they move over to Massachusetts or New Hampshire, and they wreck that state. So now it's drug infested, has high crime, has all the maladies associated with liberal culture, and so they've destroyed New Hampshire. The same thing as the way they destroyed Virginia. Here, look at Charlottesville. It's a nut house. The liberals are nuts. They're also mean as a snake. So you get Charlottesville and Northern Virginia. Northern Virginia is just a cesspool. Nothing culturally the same between the people from Northern Virginia and where you or I live, in Southern Virginia or Central Virginia. But so the same thing is happening here. Is that once they ruin one area, they move on. And maybe they do it deliberately, maybe it's unconscious. I don't know. I haven't analyzed it that quickly, that in detail. I've been occupied with other things. They tend to ruin wherever they move. They tend to change the culture and ruin it. And so, Florida and Texas better put on their guard. Better be aware because it's coming. They're going to come with them too. But it's happened throughout history. Rob, is that liberals move into one area. They ruin it, and then they aggressively move into another area, a conservative area, which is well run and pristine, and bring their policies with it. The same things happen here in Essex County. Is that this was a clean, well run, conservative county, and now it's trending liberal. Now it's trending Democrat. Trump barely. Can you imagine that? A southern county that Trump barely carried out of 200,000 votes cast, he only carried it by 300 votes or something. It's just astonishing. So liberals are creeping in here, and of course now we got the big debate is what to do with the statue in town. Nobody knows whether or not it's really a Confederate or if it's a settler. But BLM is agitating, and local blacks are agitating. Of course, I know that as soon as they take down the statues, that black crime is going to be solved automatically, black unemployment is going to be solved automatically, black drug use is going to be solved automatically, black unemployment or black African American murders are going to be solved automatically just by taking down the statue. It's just nonsense.
It certainly is, and that leads us into revisionist history, another one of the 10 plagues you reference, the 1619 Project, and here in the Charlottesville area, the critical race theory, which is being crammed down the throats of kids in our local schools, and the parents are just out of their minds. Yeah,
well, but see, what we'll do is we will find alternatives. Like, for instance, is that Nancy Pelosi runs the House like a dictator, making them wear masks, even though the CDC says we don't have to wear masks. Mm-hmm. So what they'll do is, if they're smart, Republicans are notoriously stupid. That's why they call it the stupid party. Yeah. But what they ought to do is just set up their own chamber. They'll get media coverage. They can vote on legislation, but they can have a separate chamber in which they can cast votes and ignore Nancy Pelosi and only go there once a year for the State of the Union by Biden, but otherwise they'll have their own chamber and they have their own proceedings, they have their own votes. And they'll get more media attention that way than they do now. And the same thing is going to happen with schools. Is that people are they're going to reach a point where they're just so disgusted with public schools, they'll stop paying taxes. Atlas is going to shrug eventually. Atlas is going to shrug eventually, and people will a lot of people will stop paying taxes, or they'll just pay the taxes and they say the heck with it, and they'll set up private schools, and they put their children into private schools So they get, like what they have now, only they'll do it more and expand these schools, and will they get decent education? Of course, we know that they graduate smarter and brighter and more capable because, homeschooled students and private school students always win spelling bees. The public school students never win spelling bees because they're graduated dumb. I had a client some years ago, the Institute for Policy Innovation. They did a study of basic civic literacy of graduating high school students, and they went back and did a panel back of the same graduating students after 4 years of college. And they discovered something interesting. The test was about bicameral legislatures and how a bill is made and how term of office or a congressman or a senator. And they found something interesting is that the high school students after 4 years of college actually got stupider.
Oh, no.
They actually went down in their academic performance. So that does tell you what a garbage waste of time it is to send. Because all the colleges in America today are just factories for manufacturing ignorance and hatred anyway.
It's a good way of putting it, Craig, and I think it's probably another one of the plagues that you didn't mention, but this destructive effect of...
If I had more time like Martin Luther, I would have come up with 99 Theses or 99 Plagues. But
Let's go to the wrecking of the economy. This is so unbelievable to me, and particularly that Americans tolerated it. There were just a few people that stood up to this. Most people went right along with it and just shut their businesses down.
Yeah, most people, they don't know what to do. They're not organized, and they should be organized. It's easy to organize, through your show, Rob, or through the internet, or through One American News, or Newsmax, whatever. There are many different vehicles in which to organize and throw off the shackles of government. And that's what it really is. Is that? Do you think for a moment this country would disappear if Washington disappeared? The states would solve the problems that Washington can't solve. Everything would be fine in this country, and we would pay a lot less taxes and have a lot less regulation, and lose a lot less stomach lining if Washington disappeared tomorrow. If Washington just fell down a rabbit hole, the country operated for many, many years without Washington interference, and it did just fine. The states are always laboratories for democracy anyway. Federal government is always last to consider these things. I'm not willing to say that Washington has the corner on intelligence that people in Richmond don't have, or people in Charlottesville or don't have, or people in other capital cities around the country, that they lack the wisdom of the people in Washington. I don't buy it. I think they're just as smart, if not smarter, than the people in Washington.
We've seen a lot of rioting going on, tolerated, even encouraged by liberal politicians. Why is the public continuing to elect people that encourage and support this?
Because they're lied to. Joe Biden promised unity, right? And yesterday, a group of liberal legislators met with him and said, "Stop talking to Republicans. Just stop." So much for unity. Like Abraham Lincoln once was famous for saying, you can fool some of the people some of the time, you can fool all the people some of the time, but you can't fool all the people all the time. Well, you can't. I mean, he fooled enough to win the election. I still say there's a lot of questionable voting behavior around the country, and Democrats are notorious for stealing elections anyway. History shows that. It goes back over. I've written columns about how the Democrats, liberals, have stolen elections. So, whether it's New Hampshire Senate race, the Louis Wyman race, or the bloody 6th congressional district of Indiana, in race after race. So it is within the realm of possibility to think they stole this election. But Biden certainly had no mandate to do what he's doing now. But people are lied to. If they're given all the facts, Reagan said this many times, George Washington said this many times, other good or great presidents said this many times, is that if you give the American people all the facts, they will come to the right conclusion. Well, they weren't given all the facts this time, and they came to the wrong conclusion, unfortunately. We're going to have to put up with the SOB for the next 4 years, unfortunately, but hopefully we're going to sterilize him with the election, the congressional elections in 2022, and Republicans retake the House and keep the Senate, take the legislatures, take more governorships, and basically, he'll be like a neutered dog. We'll have to put up with him, but he'll be a sad joke defeated in 4 years.
I want to go to the attack on police directly and on the rule of law through Soros-funded Commonwealth's attorneys like we have right here in Albemarle County.
Yeah, I know. He's been. This is scary. This is something that conservatives don't do, and that liberals are so good at. Going back to Lenin and later Stalin, is to organize at the grassroots level. And for Soros has been funding these elections and these selections for municipal judges and district attorneys for the last several years, and he's been successful. So these really radical left-wing judges have been elected around the country, and it's something to combat. To all things being equal, nobody would vote for any of these nutballs. They just wouldn't. Just sane people would not vote for them. But they spend a lot of money, and they're organized, and we're not. So they have been successful in electing these people, and we better get our act together. Republicans and conservatives better get their act together, because right now we're talking about the fate of Western civilization.
Two people talking to each other today who are both in the communication business. The suppression of free speech is absolutely frightening. What's your take on this and where we're going with it?
Well, first of all, we shouldn't be asking Prince Harry for his advice about the First Amendment. If he doesn't like what we fought the revolution over and the fact that we won and his side lost, then he needs to get out of the country. He needs to be deported as an undesirable. He ought to, or at least shut up, or at least learn something about the First Amendment, by studying one of the founders or the framers of the Constitution. It's terrifying. And you see liberals editing our speech all the time, like the phrase "anchor baby," which is perfectly not. It wasn't offensive. Mm-hmm. I mean, it may be offensive to some, but so what? It was a perfectly descriptive phrase about the use of Mexican illegals or Hispanic illegals or illegals coming from South America, for Saudi Arabia or wherever. Using their children born here for them to stay here. Now, there's been a law on the books. There's been basically naturalized Americans been decided by the Supreme Court for many, many years. But the phrase, at least it was descriptive, anchor baby. So we know what that meant. And the left has cowed us into editing our own language, and that's wrong. I still use the phrase anchor baby, and I hope that it makes liberals angry. I hope it ticks them off. But I'm not going to allow somebody to tell me what I can say and what I can't say.
And we have the same thing with illegal alien.
Yeah, exactly. Now it's migrant. Really? No. And people don't come here for economic deprivation. They come here in search of freedom. We welcome people in search of freedom. From running from communist regimes of Cuba or Nicaragua or Central America or something like this, but economic liberation, no, that's not a good enough argument.
And then, of course, we have the issue of the big tech companies. And I've heard a lot of conservatives discussing, how is it that we can approach this in a constitutional way? Is this a problem of government, or is there another way to solve this issue?
No, it's a problem of government. Everything is a problem of government. Everything is a problem of power and the allocation of power or the distribution of power. Facebook and Twitter should be treated just the way Standard Oil was treated back in Teddy Roosevelt's presidency, is that they are in violation clearly of antitrust legislation. After World War II, there were two aluminum companies in America. They're supplying all the aluminum in America for all the needs, for airplanes and buses and planes and things like that. And the Supreme Court ruled that it was monopolistic, that just to have two. We needed a third aluminum company, Alcoa. And the Supreme Court and the government literally created a company out of whole cloth to create more competition in the marketplace. Conservatives can't seem to get their act together to create a competitor to Twitter. If we got the case to the Supreme Court, we'd most likely win. They're clearly in violation of the Sherman Antitrust Act, and need to be broken up. Facebook needs to be broken up. Twitter needs to be broken up. All these, not because they're left wing. I'd argue the same thing because if they're a right wing, but they're not. But I don't like them because they're left wing. Their policies and they don't believe in free speech. They don't practice free speech. They shut down individuals and organizations they don't agree with. They don't politically agree with, and that is antithetical to the founding of this country. They are in violation of Sherman Antitrust and need to be broken up.
Craig Shirley, you complete this excellent essay on these 10 plagues of liberalism, that they genuinely hate America. And in fact, I think many of them, the ones who are in political power, are domestic enemies because they are abusing their oath to uphold the Constitution.
No better case than Nancy Pelosi.
Yes.
She feeds off America. She's made money. Her husband is nothing but a crook. And she's, has done some pretty bad things herself. She is a classic example of somebody who thinks the rules. I mean, look at it during the mask debate. She gets her hair done, and she's caught on camera, getting her hair done, and all the liberals are mad at the hair salon for sending out pictures of her getting her hair done without wearing a mask. Well, you know what? The anger is pointed in the wrong direction. It should be her for thinking she's Princess, Nancy, who can do what she wants, but everybody else has to do the same, something else. Is that she's the classic example of somebody who's utterly corrupt. She's utterly, and she truly hates this country. Mainly because she's gotten away with it and she knows it. Not that she has a conscience; she doesn't have a conscience, but she knows she's gotten away with it, and she's got to direct her anger somewhere for getting away with it, and the anger is directed at the United States.
I'd like you finally to put on your future vision glasses, Craig. And what should we be watching for in coming months and years?
A bunch of Oregon counties have voted to secede from Oregon and join Idaho. It is started. The breakup of the United States has started. It may be 50 years in the offing, but the process has started. As I said before, is that culturally, we're not a melting pot anymore. We used to, in the old days when I was a child, maybe when you were a child too. We ate the same breakfast cereal. We watched the same TV shows. We read the same newspapers. We're unified in our culture. We're no longer that way. Is that not with so many forms of communication, with so many different breakfast cereals, with so many different laws, with so many different cultures. We're really breaking up as a country already. It's just the formality of it is all that's left. Is at some point. And California has tried is voted to want to secede from the union. And I say, good, right, goodbye. Stop sucking off the rest of us, right? Goodbye.
Yes.
Try to make it on your own, giving hot lunches to the homeless 3 times a day, to millions of homeless, and forms of welfare. Which, by the way, I want to point out is that collectivism, and that's what it really is that it's all a part of the same ideology, whether it's communism, socialism, Maoism, Leninism, Democrat Party, liberalism. It's all they're all different forms of collectivism, and they've always failed unless they adopted a free market to use. And so you end up with an oligarchy like in China, which has a somewhat of a free market and is propped up by the Communist Party of China, defended by the Communist Party of China, engineered by the Communist Party of China. But otherwise is that China would not have made it under a collectivist system. That's why the Soviet Union, why Reagan defeated the Soviet Union was because it was a collectivist state that was failing. And all those collectivist states, whether it's Czechoslovakia or Hungary, they all failed. Collectivism is failing, has failed, and will fail here in the United States, and is failing now. If California went off on its own, seceded, it would fail within several years. It just doesn't make economic sense whatsoever. So take New York with you, take Illinois with you, take Oregon and Washington State with you. Okay, create the what do you call it, the pagan state of pagan states. I love that. That's a great idea. The pagan states. And let the rest of us create the God-fearing states of America, and never the twain shall meet. But that's my crystal ball, is to continue breakup. We have so many different languages. I think you can take, in California, you can take your driver's test in something like 2 dozen different dialects, Filipino and Japanese, and and you can create your own, you can live in your own culture. That was the greatness about making English the official language, which I don't think is ever going to pass now, was to make it as a blended society and culture. But now you can be a Hispanic. You can talk to your Hispanic friends in Spanish. You can watch Spanish television. You can read Spanish newspapers. You can live a Spanish life and never touch the American way of life. So your loyalty is not to the American way of life. Your loyalty is to your culture you're part of. So the breakup has already started. It's only going to get worse. And by the way, it's both sides want it. Liberals, conservatives really want it.
Yes.
And liberals kind of want it. So that's my crystal ball.
Craig Shirley, tell us about your latest book and where we can get a copy of it, because I know you've got a new one out.
Oh, thank you, Rob. I'm always, keeps me off the streets and out of the pool halls, So I'm always working on a new book. I just finished the manuscript for April 1945, The Hinge of History. This is the companion book to my book, December 1941. And this is about not the ending of the war. It wasn't about the end of the war, because the end of the war wasn't until September, when the Japanese surrendered to MacArthur on the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay in September of 1945. But so many things happened in April of 1945. FDR dies. Hitler commits suicide. Mussolini's overtaken by the mob. We discover Auschwitz. We discover Dachau. The war is raging in Okinawa and in the Pacific. And Okinawa especially is important because it was supposed to be the final staging ground for the massive invasion of Japan, which was short-circuited by the detonation of the nuclear bombs. I just devoted a book to this, like J. Winnick wrote April 1865. I wrote April 1945, and now I'm working on several more Reagan books, including The Search for Reagan, and an untitled Reagan book about Reagan, the negotiator. So, like I said, it keeps me focused and keeps me out of trouble.
Craig Shirley, it's been a wonderful time with you this morning. Thank you so much for joining us today on the Shilling Show Unleashed podcast.
My pleasure. Thank you, Rob, very much.
That concludes another edition of the Shilling Show Unleashed podcast. Visit us online at shillingshow.com, where you can directly support this podcast by clicking on the Patreon banner at the top of the page and making a monthly donation. Your support is essential for the continuation of the Shilling Show Unleashed podcast. Until next time,